made in Germany. So it's quite expensive. Anybody got any idea why that neck is?
So you can make different sounds.
So I can walk with it like this. That's what a friend of mine does. He walks around festivals like that. Actually, the reason it's like that is because when this came out, it was the best way to create the tension on the strings. They didn't have regular nuts like in our instruments now. You know, so we have like bone nut here, and this is a wooden nut here to raise it up off the back of the neck.
How does that sound?
It's not tuned. I hadn't started to tune it yet. I was going to get in here and try to tune them. I just found my tuners. Imagine though, you're in England watching a concert and they play through a song and then they go, "We got to tune up." So you sit back and you gotta wait for 10 minutes while they tune their instruments back up. You know, unlike today, we get really all worked up because there's 10 minutes of nothing to watch. You know, they just turn to people next to them and start talking. So I think it's a pretty neat thing. Songs in those days would run easily 10, 15, 20 verses, you know, for some of the ballads and things. And if you were a Viking, some of those things would run close to 60 or more verses, some of the stories, because they would be telling the whole story about the big battle, which is pretty cool. So, you know, people would just sit around the campfire and listen to this one song for almost an hour, you know. But, you know, it's kind of like back when I was a kid, Light My Fire, which was about 12 minutes. Don McLean's song that was like about 10 minutes or so. That's about the length of attention span we got nowadays.
Right.
So.
30 seconds.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really beautiful.
So anyway, yeah. So I'm going to try to tune this up in a short bit, and this one will be in tune. That's tuned to itself, but...
Now what about this one here? This is really beautiful. It has some...
That is a bandolin.
Has the little seashell.
Yeah, this is mostly a mandolin. I generally 8, strings, but as I went to get ready to bring it this time here, the strings were way up high on it, and I couldn't, my fingers won't handle that right now. But it's a mandolin. They were about, I'm guessing around early 1700s they started to come into popularity, and it originated in Italy, I understand, which is pretty neat. And it was a bowl back. It was similar to the lute over there. It's interesting. A lot of people, they sell them on eBay. They call them potato bug, potato mandolins or round back. So yeah. These are some of the drums that were being used at the time. These are like pre-kettles, but to show you what to give you the name, they're called knockers. You can kind of get what I'm saying. Adults.
Right.
So, and they were like kettle drums. They'd be tuned up different. It's got 2 different pitches on it. And I was holding back on pulling them tight because if it gets too much moisture, then I'm always tuning. You're doing this too much. There we go. And they used these for drumsticks then. Oh, there goes my guitar. That's why I don't bring nice instruments with me. My expensive guitars, that's expensive enough. And drums are mostly used for dancing. So when you be dancing, you'll be like da 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 da, and drumming would tell you when you put your feet down when you're dancing, so everybody would know as they're all dancing around that they put their feet down when the drum beats. Pretty cool. This instrument was something similar to what the Pied Piper played. He would put it over his shoulder like this. He'd play one side this, and the other side he'd have a little, like a recorder that only had notes for four fingers and underneath. And he'd have to blow harder to get it up next octaves as he goes along. And he would play this and do this. Now if you can do this, you might be able to do that. Give you a piece of leather on this side. It's gonna wear out if you put something else on it. And then the wooden on the other side is so big hard enough wood that can make it still hang with it. This is sure don't. You can tell the difference between the two sounds. It's kind of a neat.
Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
Now, what is that called?
It's called a hammer dulcimer.
A hammer dulcimer.
It originated in the Middle East, Persian. I've got a doctor who's Persian.
Okay.
And she's got something similar to it. But the only time I see her is like for a quick office visit or for an endoscopy. And those are not the times for that. You know, be pulling out musical instruments and jamming. You know.
Well, cool.
So, but yeah, I read one of these was brought over, sent special for somebody.
Okay.
And they put it in the captain's quarters to protect it. To be honest with you, this is probably the most indestructible instrument I've got. You know?
Oh, wow.
It's a pretty good, pretty solid instrument. But I guess if you drop it wrong, you could flip the bridge or break it.
Yeah.
It's $2,000 gone.
Yeah. So we're gonna keep our kids on this. Cool.
And then the next musketeer, and so forth and so forth. So by the time you have to fire again, what do you have time to do? And in Virginia, we're talking about the militia, right? So you have a mix of readiness here. Some people were professional soldiers. Other people might be carpenters, laborers, and blacksmiths. And so when you get off the boat, you're going to have to learn how to fight, right? Your more experienced men, target tier, you want those men, in the front, as opposed to the man who just learned how to shoot the musket.
Right. You don't want the guy in front of you who's going to break the run.
Exactly.
Frickin' tribe!
Stop ram.
Ram the phone. Frickin' tribe! Have a care! And give fire! Stall the piece. Search the piece.
She got excited.
I hope so.
She's loving all of this.
Bunch piece.
You can take your ears off. It takes a minute to reload. Did it scare you?
Secure the piece.
It's okay, buddy.
I covered her ears off, but she didn't even jump. She was like, whatever. She did.
Great.
I know, right?
Naturally, here at this park, we don't fire cannonballs, but it would have fired a ball about this size. And crew could, this is actually a piece that would have been on board a ship or in a fortress. It's not we have a couple pieces over here, and this one here that are field carriages, and you can see how much easier it'd be to put this behind some horses to pull this through a field, whereas this has much smaller wheels and wasn't meant to be moved around a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So welcome to the forge, guys. What kind of questions have you always wanted to ask a blacksmith?
Oh, look, you made a flower, Joe.
This is your chance.
It's a flower out of metal. The flower right now. Look how he's moving the petals with his tool. He's got wires. Oh, look, he's blowing air into the fire hot. And the oxygen to live. It's a little bigger. Or in the fire tank.
Drowned in 1616 out on the river crossing in a boat. So Wickham was more of a deacon. He wasn't an ordained minister. So, but he gets placed into the role as minister here at Henricus. And in fact, later on, they try and get him to be ordained. They requested of the archbishop so that he can do the sacraments of communion. So at that point, no one was allowed to take communion in the colony because there's no one who's qualified to administer. So he's the one who's acting as minister at the time of the first General Assembly.
Really? That was in
1619.
1619. That's not good. That's awesome. Very interesting.
So his parlor would have nicer stuff. This is where he's doing his work. He's taking his meals. This is where he's, receiving guests and things like that. Where all the labor and stuff like that happens over the other side of the hallway, where all the labor and hard work's being done, the food's being prepared, and things like that. And that's also where the servants sleep and stay. Come on in.
Come on in. A place where, by about 1613, they were realizing that if you just dump somebody off the boat in Jamestown and put them to work, about half of them aren't going to live through their first year because they're not acclimated to the Virginia heat. They're suffering from malnutrition, dehydration, scurvy, and stuff from the sea voyage. Anybody who brought diseases along, living cheek by jowl in that ship, they're going to be sharing them out to all their shipmates. So people are in fairly rough shape and not really physiologically equipped to handle Virginia when they get here. So in 1614 they opened Mount Melody and they could bring you up here, and this was a hospital in the sense of a sanitarium or a rest stop, for hospitality, and it was so that you could
acclimate them.
You could acclimate them, yeah.
Well, I've always said, when they got off the ship, they left a place that had castles and inns and caverns, and they got here and
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So as your staff up here is for the most part attendants. You might have a surgeon in residence during some parts of the English, the Virginia Company period. In general, I would normally be downriver in Jamestown. I'd come up to deal with disease outbreaks and important people getting sick or having to dig bullets out of somebody or dig arrows out of somebody after an Indian fight.
Well, Tyler, these would be all the medical instruments the
Yep.
doctor would use.
Yep.
Saw to have to, if you had to cut your...
Well, actually, doctors don't get their hands dirty. I'm a surgeon.
Okay.
So a doctor is a gentleman who goes to med school. He's been to university, he's going to med school, from a good family, and he's learned all the theory and stuff. He's memorized Galen and Dioscorides, and he knows his Latin and Greek and astrology and stuff, and doesn't get his hands dirty. He'll check your pulse, he'll check for fever, talk to you about your diet, your potty habits, and poke and prod and ask where it hurts and things. And then they'll send you to the apothecary with a prescription for medicines or to the surgeon for a physical fix. And then your surgeons and apothecaries are both tradespeople. they start out as a tween-age apprentice, and then they learn hands-on until their early 20s, and then they do an exam as a journeyman. So your doctors think of the surgeons and apothecaries a bunch of vulgar tradespeople, and then the apothecaries and surgeons think of the doctors as being a bunch of arrogant snots. To the extent that to this day, when you have somebody in the UK who goes through med school and then specializes as a surgeon, does his residency and gets board certified, that at that point he will tell people to stop calling him doctor and call him Mr. And I was asking a Brit visitor at Jamestown if that was still the case, and he said it's not just surgeons, any specialist. A neurologist or something, anybody who's actually got a heavy-duty specialty in English medicine wants to be called Mr., and it goes back to this whole class warfare, snarking contest in the Middle Ages and Renaissance.
Fascinating. Okay.
And the funny part is, if you got the places like Paris or London or Padua, for example, that had med schools, by the 1500s it became legal to cut up cadavers.
Yes.
In England, if you were convicted of a really heinous crime, they would sentence you to death and dissection. Of course, after you've been hung, you probably don't care that you're being dissected.
Right, you wouldn't know.
But
wow.
So, for example, the anatomy theater of Padua had this huge bowl-shaped theater, with your med students, your first-year students up in the nosebleed seats and stuff. And then down in the center, you had a table with a cadaver and being dissected, and you'd have your professor off to the side with a podium who's reading aloud from Galen. And now these med students, their exam to be a doctor in 1640s in London, it's a 4-hour oral exam in Latin where they yell something at you and you respond with a Galen quote. Now, bearing in mind, Galen dissected animals because you couldn't cut up humans in Rome. And Galen knew that there were differences, but he said, do your own research and think for yourself. But when you filter that through, fall of Rome, Dark Ages, Middle Ages, Renaissance, what comes out the other side is Galen said it, I believe it, that settles it. You get these Galen fundamentalist type things. So in Padua, you'd have this huge operating theater, and the med students are all taking notes off the professor reading Galen and totally ignoring the cadaver. And meanwhile, the person who's cutting that body open is an apprentice barber surgeon. So the person who is actually learning the most about what's inside that body is this apprentice. This teenager who's learning to be a barber surgeon, and as opposed to all these gentlemen up in the nosebleed seats taking notes on Galen. And what's funny is in the 1500s you have a medical student, I think it's Jakob Vasali. When these guys published, they all took